My name is Meredith Kaplan. When my mother was pregnant with me, she had an emergency C-section. And when the doctor took me out, they immediately rushed me straight to the NICU. And my mother never even had an opportunity to meet me when I was first born. They just rushed me straight over to the NICU, and my mother didn't know what was wrong. So she asked, is something wrong with her? But the doctor said, oh, she's fine, but she's just born with something odd. Something's a little off. My mom still was confused as to what was going on. And then when they first brought her to me, she saw that my eyes were set a little bit far apart from each other. And then the doctor told her that he didn't know why my eyes looked like that. And then my mother carried me around from hospital to doctor, and then for a year, she tried to figure out why I looked different and why I have one blue eye and one brown eye, and I was born with a white streak in my hair right at the top of my head. So she took me to lots of different places, and nobody knew why I was like this. And then finally, she took me to Winston-Salem Baptist Hospital, and there was a doctor there who had just started, I think he was an audiologist. No, he had just started working at the hospital. He had just started in his career. Anyway, he came to me and he saw my face and he knew that I had Waardenburg syndrome. So that was the syndrome I have, is Waardenburg syndrome. And he was familiar with Waardenburg's and knew that I was born deaf. And so he told my mother, he said, I believe your daughter is deaf. And my mother said, no, she's not. She did not know anything about me being deaf at that time. I was 1 year old, but obviously I was born deaf because I do have Waardenburg syndrome. But she did not realize yet that I was deaf. Nobody else in my family has this syndrome, and nobody else in my family is deaf either. My mother was very confused. She just didn't really know what to do. Luckily, back then, there was a program for parents to be able to learn sign language and for me to be able to learn sign language as well. So that's where she learned, was from an audiologist. And she had gotten referred to one of the best one. Parents want to go to the best audiologist they can. So she took me to High Point, to an audiologist there. And at that time, there was no talk about cochlear implants yet. They didn't get developed until the 80s. So the audiologist wanted to put hearing aids on me, and they did. And I don't remember how I felt the first time I heard something with a hearing aid. I don't remember that. But one thing I do remember is having a body aid, which was the box on the front of your chest with the earbuds that went up to your ears. That's what I had at school, and I hated wearing that body aid. I always told the audiologist, any audiologist I had when I was growing up, I always told them I was too deaf. It didn't help. I didn't want to wear any type of aid. The earliest thing I remember is I remember going into the soundproof booth and sitting behind the window, looking at the window with the audiologist on the other side, with a double window between us. And I always had the clicker that you were supposed to click every time I heard something. Sometimes I would pretend that I could hear and I would click the button. Sometimes I would wait to see if their hand moved, and then when their hand moved, I would click the clicker. So my goal was to become hearing so that I didn't have to wear that body aid anymore. Or I just wouldn't click the clicker at all. And then the audiologist would try to test me with these really loud noises, and I wouldn't click it at all, but I know that the audiologist would see my face, and if it was really super loud, then they would know that I could hear it So I tried to keep a very straight face so they wouldn't realize that I was actually hearing those very, very loud sounds. But I kept telling them that I was too deaf. I didn't want to wear the body aids. Then I do remember an audiologist telling me to repeat words after the audiologist said the words. And they put a piece of paper in front of their mouths. And they would say, for example, ice cream, football, basketball, outside. And the more I had to answer those questions, the more I would memorize those words, because they would repeat the same words every time I went to the audiologist. So I started memorizing the words they said. So I would wait until I heard something that sounded like ice, and then I know that, okay, that one's ice cream. Or when I heard something I could almost hear out, and then I would know that that was outside. And then for basketball, I would hear the B and the SK sound, and I would know that was basketball. So I just tried to catch what little bit I could catch and then put it with what I remembered. My deaf friends and I, when we knew that we had an audiology appointment, we would usually ask each other, you just went to the audiologist, what did they say, what did you do? Or we would share with each other the words that we remembered so that we could go into the audiology exam remembering those words. And I asked my mom one time what the words sounded like. And she thought that I wanted to learn to talk and that I was very excited about learning to talk, but that wasn't the case. Actually, we just wanted to be able to beat the audiology exam. And then later, when I got a little bit older, during my teen years, I remember Heather Whitestone winning and being crowned Miss America. It was on live TV. I do remember my mom finding out that Heather was able to speak because she spoke on TV. And so my mom did some research on her background, and she found out that Heather went to an oral school. So she called the audiologist, and she asked the audiologist where an oral school was. During that phone call, then that audiologist told my mother about cochlear implants. My mom was very interested in having a cochlear implant for me. At that time, I was 17. We went to the audiologist, and I was nervous because I had just started liking to wear hearing aids. And about the age of 16, prior to the age of 16, I hated hearing aids. Finally, at the age of 16, I actually started liking hearing aids and started depending on what I could hear from hearing aids. So now I'm 17, we're going to an audiologist, and this audiologist was stressing cochlear implants and was actually trying to push cochlear implants on us. And I knew that my deaf friends who had been implanted had lost their hearing. I have good hearing in my left ear. I'm completely deaf in my right ear. I don't hear anything at all in my right ear, but I do have pretty good hearing in my left ear, and I didn't want to lose what I had. But I remember the audiologist was very persistent, pushing cochlear implants. They went ahead and scheduled appointments for the MRI and for surgery. And I felt like I was being rushed into this decision and thought, okay, if this is what I'm supposed to do. But my mom was so excited. And I understand my mom's position. She's hearing. She wanted her child to be fixed. I can't blame her for that. And then the day before surgery, I went in for a pre-surgical appointment or something like that. And I finally had the opportunity to actually sit down with my mom. And my mom finally asked me, she said, I realize I've never even asked you this question. Do you want it? And I said no, because I didn't want to lose what hearing I had. And my mom said, well, why didn't you say anything? And I said, well, it was because I felt like the audiologist never even asked me if I wanted it. it was just a conversation between the two of you without me. So she didn't realize that. So she said, "You don't want a cochlear implant?" And I said, "No." Because again, I just cherished what hearing I had from my left ear. So she canceled the surgery and transferred me to a different audiologist. And I had always gone to an audiologist at UNC Chapel Hill. And I was willing to drive that far because there wasn't one in my home area. So I usually had to drive an hour and a half to my audiologist. But I had to go there to get an audiologist that I felt comfortable with, that respected me, that would do what I liked. That audiologist in Chapel Hill would always ask me, "Is your hearing aid okay?" I used to have an analog hearing aid, and I tried to keep it as long as I could. Unfortunately, it died. And my audiologist even sat down with me and took the time to explain about digital hearing aids. So then I got a digital hearing aid, and he explained what I could expect in terms of the difference between having had an analog hearing aid to now a new digital hearing aid. So I knew what to expect. So I liked that from that new audiologist. After I got my digital hearing aid, I stopped about 3 years ago, and I haven't been to an audiologist since then. Hopefully one day soon I'll go again. Now, as far as my advice to audiologists, I would advise you to take your time and really listen to your clients, not only to the parents. I mean, unless they're very, very small children, of course, that's fine. And try not to be pushy. And explain. Take your time and explain. Have a personal interaction with your client, not just a typical doctor interaction with your client. And don't overload the person with information all at once. That can be overwhelming. So take your time, explain, and have a personal interaction with your client, and respect what your client wants to do. Because if I feel respected, then I will try something. If I feel like you don't respect me, I'm not going to try what you're recommending. And I think others are pretty similar to that. Now, as for my children, I have 4 children. 3 of them are deaf. 1 has a cochlear implant. 1 doesn't have any cochlear implant at all because he has autism also. And then my youngest is 2 deaf. He has ANSD. And I'm sorry, I can't tell you what ANSD stands for, but I'm pretty sure if you're an audiologist, you know what that means. My youngest is 3, the one with ANSD. He's 3, so we're going to wait and see what he wants to do. But my oldest son with the cochlear implant, he was born in New York. And there's a very strong deaf community in New York. And so there was already a strong relationship between the deaf community and the audiologists locally. So everything went fine in New York. And then when we moved down here, I felt like there was no partnership between the deaf community and the audiologists. And I've noticed that here in North Carolina, the audiologists just focus on fixing the problem. And I get that, but it would be nice if we had a good partnership between the audiologists and the deaf community. Now, for my oldest child, when I moved here, he needed a hearing aid, but they automatically started talking about cochlear implants. And that reminded me of my experience when that was pushed on me, and so I immediately said no. And that particular audiologist was in Greensboro, and she said, "Okay, well, I can't provide you my services." And I said, "Okay." But that reminded me of my audiologist that I had in Chapel Hill. And so I drove to Chapel Hill. And we couldn't see the same audiologist. But I did get an audiologist for my son who tried to sign and who respected us. And we sat down and she explained everything to me and got an interpreter for our meetings. Now, my son was able to wear hearing aids, but he had allergic reactions to the ear molds. Anytime he put ear molds in his ears, it bothered him. He just was irritated by the ear molds, but he loved to hear. When he was 5, he told me that he wanted a cochlear implant, and I said, okay. So he did have surgery, and he had one cochlear implant, and he's loved his cochlear implant ever since. Now, and we continue to go to that audiologist because that audiologist signs and has a good relationship with the community, the deaf community, and respects us. Now, we drive a long distance to go to that audiologist because of the relationship we have with that audiologist. So all of my children go to the same audiologist as my oldest.